The Bandit's Shadow. Chapter 1. Whispers of Trouble. The wind, sharp with the coming chill of autumn, whispered through the eaves of Oakhaven, a sound usually as familiar and comforting as the crackle of a hearth fire. But tonight, the wind carried a different tune, a low hum of unease that prickled the skin and tightened the jaws. Kael, hunched over a mending task outside his small, isolated cottage on the village fringe, felt it most acutely. The usual evening sounds, the distant bleating of sheep, the rhythmic thud of an axe from the woodpile, the murmur of voices from the communal hearth, were muted, strained. Something was wrong. He'd seen it earlier, a ripple of hushed conversations that broke apart as he approached, faces turning away, eyes darting towards the central square with a shared, unspoken dread. Old Man Hemlock, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a grim set to his mouth, had hurried past, not even glancing his way. Anya, her hands perpetually busy, had clutched her shawl tighter, her gaze fixed on the shadowed path leading from the woods. The air itself felt heavy, laden with a fear that had no immediate source, only a creeping presence. Kael's hands, calloused from years of working the soil, paused there fumbling with a frayed rope. He knew this feeling. He'd lived with it for years, a quiet companion born from a loss he rarely spoke of, a shadow that clung to him even in the brightest sun. This communal fear, however, felt different. It was a sudden, sharp terror, not the slow erosion of hardship. It spoke of something violent, something swift and uninvited. He straightened, his gaze sweeping towards the cluster of cottages that made up Oakhaven. The faint glow of lanterns spilled from windows, creating pools of uncertain light against the encroaching darkness. Then he heard it, a sound that cut through the wind's lament, a high, keening wail, quickly stifled, followed by a guttural roar that sent a shiver down Kael's spine. It was a sound of struggle, of raw desperation. A group of villagers, a knot of agitated figures, spilled from the direction of Elder Torvin's stead. Their voices, normally reserved and measured, were raised in a frantic cacophony, fragments of words caught by the wind. "Gone, taken, Blackwood!" Kael's breath hitched. Blackwood. The name was a whisper in the taverns, a bogeyman told to frighten children, but also a grim reality for those who lived on the wilder edges of their world. Silas, the Shadow, Blackwood and his band. They were more than mere brigands. They were a blight, a predatory force that moved through the shadowed places, leaving ruin in their wake. And now they had touched Oakhaven. He dropped the rope, his movements uncharacteristically quick. The fear he'd sensed was not his alone. It was a contagion, spreading through the heart of their quiet village. He moved towards the square, his own unease a cold knot in his gut. Something else now, but it was grim curiosity, a sense of inevitability. He'd always kept to himself, a solitary figure on the periphery, content with the silent rhythm of the earth. But the raw fear in the air, the palpable sense of violation, tugged at something deep within him, a buried ember of protectiveness he thought long extinguished. As he neared the center of the village, the scene resolved itself into a tableau of disarray. Villagers stood in agitated clusters, their faces pale in the lantern light, their eyes wide with a shared horror. In the center of it all stood Elder Torvin, his usually stoic frame bowed, his face etched with a grief so profound it seemed to radiate from him. His hands, weathered and strong, were clenched at his sides, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Around him, the village guard, a handful of men armed with little more than spears and stout hearts, looked bewildered and helpless. Kael stopped at the edge of the crowd, an outsider even in this shared moment of despair. He knew Torvin. The elder had always offered Kael a quiet nod, a flicker of recognition for the solitary man who tended his small plot on the fringes. Torvin was the pillar of Oakhaven, his wisdom the bedrock upon which their peaceful existence was built. To see him so utterly broken was a testament to the severity of the night's events. Then, Torvin's voice, thick with unshed tears, rose above the murmuring throng. It was a voice that usually commanded respect, a voice of calm authority, but tonight it was raw with anguish. "She is gone," he choked out, the words ripped from his throat. "My Ilara! Taken!" A collective gasp rippled through the assembled villagers. Ilara. the elder's daughter. Kael had seen her only a few times, a fleeting glimpse of a bright spirit, her laughter like the chime of small bells. She was known for her quick mind, her insatiable curiosity, the way she'd often be found poring over ancient scrolls in the village hall. A girl of learning, not of the fields. And now, she was taken. The Blackwood Bandits, Torvin continued, his voice gaining a desperate edge. They came with the night. No warning, no mercy. My guard. He gestured weakly towards the small group of men, their faces a mixture of shame and frustration. They were overwhelmed. The helplessness in his voice was a palpable thing, a heavy shroud that settled over the villagers. Kael understood. Oakhaven was a place of quiet prosperity, a haven from the harsher realities of the world. Their defenses were geared towards protecting against stray wolves or the occasional territorial dispute, not against the organized brutality of seasoned bandits. I have no one else to turn to, Torvin stammered, his gaze sweeping across the faces in the crowd, a desperate plea in his tear-filled eyes. His usual composure had been stripped away, leaving behind the raw, primal fear of a father whose child had been stolen. The king's men are weeks away, if they even come. The roads are too dangerous for a proper escort. He paused, his gaze finally settling on Kael, who stood a little apart, his presence a quiet question mark. Kael, the man who lived alone, the man who rarely spoke, the man whose eyes held a depth of sorrow that mirrored Torvin's own, though for reasons none in Oakhaven knew. Is there no one? Torvin's voice cracked. No one with courage? No one who can track them? Bring her back? He looked at the strong hands of the farmers, the steady gaze of the hunters who occasionally passed through, but saw only fear, only resignation. I can offer little, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. My word. And what little silver the village has. It is not much, I know. But it is all I have. The meager reward hung in the air, a stark acknowledgment of their desperation. It was not enough to lure a seasoned tracker, not enough to brave the dangers of the Blackwood territory. Yet, as Torvin's desperate gaze met Kael's, something shifted within the solitary farmer. He saw not just a village leader's plea, but a father's agony. He saw Lara, her bright spirit snuffed out, facing an unknown, terrifying fate. And in that shared, visceral pain, Kael saw a reflection of his own past, a ghost of a loss that had shaped him, that had left him adrift in his own quiet sorrow. He felt the pull, a reluctant tug towards an obligation he had long since tried to outrun. He had sworn to himself, after everything, to never again be drawn into the violence, the messy, brutal business of other people's lives. He was a farmer, a man of the earth, not a hunter of men. Yet, the image of Alara, the sound of Torvin's broken plea, the shared fear in the eyes of his neighbors, it all coalesced into a force he could no longer ignore. It was a duty, not one spoken, but one deeply felt, a resonance with the elder's despair that bypassed logic and settled in the gut. He took a step forward, his boots crunching softly on the gravel of the square. Heads turned. The murmuring ceased. All eyes, filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief, fixed on him. Kael, the quiet man from the edge of the village. He didn't know if he could do it. The thought of confronting Blackwood, of stepping into the brutal world he had so carefully avoided, sent a tremor of apprehension through him. His hands were used to the feel of soil and wood, not the heft of a weapon, the grim business of taking a life. But the image of Alara's stolen laughter, the echo of Torvin's broken plea, the gnawing emptiness of his own past loss, it was a combination that outweighed his fear. He reached the elder, stopping a respectful distance away. He met Torvin's desperate gaze, his own eyes steady, though a storm brewed within him. He saw the flicker of hope rekindled in the elder's eyes, a desperate, fragile thing. I will go, Kael said, his voice low, rough, and used to such pronouncements. It was a simple statement, devoid of fanfare, yet it carried the weight of a pact, a commitment forged in the shared crucible of grief and fear. He didn't offer bravado, or promises of victory. Just a simple, unwavering resolve. Torvin's shoulders sagged with relief, a shudder passing through him. He reached out a trembling hand, not to clap Kael on the back, but to grasp his arm, his grip surprisingly strong. You will? Truly? Kael nodded, his gaze already drifting towards the dark, imposing line of the forest that ringed Oakhaven. The wind seemed to sigh around them, a mournful prelude to the journey ahead. I will find her, Kael said, the words a promise to Torvin, and more importantly to himself. He had no bow, no hunting knife, only the worn clothes on his back and the heavy burden of his own past. But as he looked at the elder, at the faces of his frightened neighbors, he knew he had to try. He had to step out of the shadows of his own life and into the much darker shadow cast by Silas Blackwood. He would trade his farming tools, not for a weapon yet, but for the chance to reclaim something precious, something that had been so brutally ripped away from this quiet, unsuspecting village. The first step into the unknown had begun, not with a stride, but with a quiet, resolute nod. You! A voice from the crowd, laced with disbelief, questioned. Kael ignored it. He turned his attention back to Torvin, the offer of silver coins feeling hollow and insufficient. The reward? He began, his voice softer now, more earnest. It is not enough. Torvin, understanding dawning, offered a small, weary smile. We have little else to offer, Kael. What more can I give? Kael looked down at his hands, then towards his small, ramshackle cottage that stood on the outskirts of the village. My tools, he said, a strange resolve settling over him. My farming tools. They have served me well. I will trade them for a bow. And a knife if you have one to spare. I will need provisions, enough for a few days. I will track her. I will bring her back. The villagers exchanged stunned glances. Trading his livelihood, the very instruments of his survival, for the tools of a hunt he was ill-equipped for? It was a sacrifice that spoke volumes, a testament to a resolve they hadn't perceived in the quiet peasant. Elder Torvin nodded slowly, his gaze firm. It is a steep price, Kael. A dangerous undertaking. But if you are willing... He met Kael's eyes, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then you have my blessing. And whatever we can scrape together to aid your journey. He gestured to a few women who had already begun to move, gathering what little they could spare, hardtack, a waterskin, a rough-spun cloak. Kael felt a tremor run through him, a mix of apprehension and a nascent sense of purpose. He had always lived by the rhythm of the seasons, the predictable turning of the earth. Now, he was stepping into a world of uncertainty, a wilderness that held unknown dangers. He was exchanging the familiar comfort of his plow for the uncertain path of a hunter, driven not by glory or coin, but by a desperate echo of his own lost grief. He would leave the known behind, venturing into the shadow of the Blackwood Bandits, armed with little more than a reluctant resolve and a silent promise to a grieving father. The first steps into the unknown awaited.